Have you ever carried a secret so heavy it crushed your lungs with every breath? Can you imagine looking at your reflection and seeing a stranger because the person you were died on a particular night? Do you know what it's like to walk through the world pretending to be whole while pieces of you are scattered in a dark room you can never forget? Have you ever had your worst nightmare knock on your door years later, wearing a smile and holding flowers, asking for your hand in marriage? Can you fathom the twisted satisfaction of saying yes, not out of love but out of a revenge so carefully planned it took 20 years to ripen? Well, let me tell you, at 73 years old, I know exactly how all of that feels. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes revenge isn't a dish best served cold. Sometimes it's served at exactly the right temperature, after years of careful preparation, to men who thought their crimes were buried with your silence. My name is Elizabeth. Elizabeth Sarah Thompson now. Though for 20 years I was someone else. A ghost walking through life, a woman wearing the mask of who I used to be before 10 men decided I was less than human. When people ask about my past, I used to deflect with practiced ease, changing subjects like a magician misdirecting attention. But silence protected them, not me. And after what I did, after the revenge I took, I think it's time to tell the whole truth. Not just for me, but for every woman who's been told her silence is the price of survival, who's been threatened into swallowing her truth like broken glass. But before I continue, please subscribe to this channel. Also, drop a comment so I can know where you are watching from. I was 22 years old in 1973. Fresh out of college with a degree in journalism, ink still wet on my diploma, dreams bigger than my small apartment could hold. I'd gotten a job at the Richmond Daily Herald, a small newspaper where everyone knew everyone and the coffee was always burnt. Not the New York Times, but it was a start. I had an apartment with yellow walls that I'd painted myself, getting more paint on my overalls than on the walls. A typewriter that only stuck on the letter Q, which I'd bought secondhand from a pawn shop. And dreams. God, I had dreams. I was going to be the next great investigative reporter. I was going to tell stories that mattered, expose corruption, and give voice to the voiceless. My mother had sewn me 5 professional dresses before I left for Richmond. A working girl needs options, she'd said, pins between her teeth as she hemmed the skirts to what she considered a respectable length. She was so proud. Her daughter, the first in our family to graduate from college, is working at a real newspaper. She called every Sunday to ask what stories I was working on, and I'd tell her about city council meetings and local business features, making them sound more glamorous than they were. The party was supposed to be a celebration. My first big story had made the front page. An exposé on corruption in the city planning department. 3 months of investigation, following paper trails, conducting interviews with sources who only agreed to meet in parking garages, like we were in a movie. When it ran, taking up half the front page with my byline bold underneath, I thought I'd made it. Mr. Daniels, my editor, invited me to his house for what he called a team celebration. "Wear something nice," he'd said, winking in what I thought was a fatherly way. "This is a big deal, Elizabeth. Not many reporters get a front page story in their first year." I was so proud, so naive. I wore my best dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that my mother had sewn for my graduation. Navy blue with white daisies, a Peter Pan collar, and a belt that cinched my waist. I looked like what I was, a young woman playing dress-up in a professional world, trying so hard to be taken seriously. I practiced my thank you speech in the mirror, imagining this was the first of many celebrations. I even bought a bottle of wine with my grocery money, wanting to contribute something to the party. The drive to Mr. Daniels' house took me through the nice part of Richmond, where the houses had columns and circular driveways. I'd written down the address 3 times and checked it against my map twice. My hands were shaking a little from excitement as I parked on the street, not wanting to block anyone in the driveway. I could see lights on inside, shadows moving past windows. I thought I was fashionably late, arriving 30 minutes after the invitation time, like my mother had taught me. Do you remember being young and believing the world was fundamentally good? That bad things happen to other people in other places but not to you. Do you think your hard work and talent would be enough to protect you? I walked into that house with a bottle of wine and a smile, expecting colleagues and congratulations. The door was unlocked. "Come on in." Mr. Daniels had called when I knocked. I pushed it open, stepped inside, and heard it lock behind me with a click that still echoes in my nightmares 40 years later. The living room was full of men. Only men. I recognized them all. Reporters, editors, even some sources from the city government. They were drinking, laughing, the air thick with cigarette smoke. My stomach dropped, but I told myself I was being silly. Maybe the other women were in the kitchen. Maybe they were running late. "There she is," Mr. Daniels boomed, raising his glass. "Our star reporter." The others raised their glasses too, but their smiles were wrong. Have you ever seen a group of predators realize their prey has walked into the trap? That's what I saw in that room. 10 men looking at me like I was something they'd ordered from a menu. "Where is everyone else?" I asked, though my body already knew something was wrong. That animal instinct that screams danger before your mind catches up. My skin prickled, my heart rate spiked, and everything in me said run. But where? The door was locked behind me, and Thomas Mitchell from the sports desk was leaning against it, grinning. Mr. Daniels smiled, but it wasn't the professional smile from the office. It was something else, something that made my skin crawl like insects were underneath it. "You're everyone, Elizabeth," he said. "This party is all for you. We wanted to give you a proper welcome to the boys' club." I tried to leave. "That's important for you to know. I didn't freeze, didn't comply. I fought. But have you ever tried to fight 10 men? I was 5 feet 4 inches and 120 pounds. I'd taken a self-defense class in college where they taught us to go for the eyes and groin, but they hadn't taught us what to do when there were 10 attackers, when they were people you knew, when they'd planned it all out in advance. I won't describe what happened next in detail. Not because I can't. Every second is carved into my memory like initials in tree bark, permanent and scarring, but because trauma doesn't need to be pornographic to be valid. What you need to know is this. 10 men, all colleagues I'd trusted, took turns destroying who I was. They were organized about it, methodical, like it was something they'd done before. They knew exactly how to position themselves so no one could hear my screams. They knew exactly what to say to make me understand that fighting would make it worse. "You wanted to play with the big boys," someone said. Marcus Williams, I think, though their voices started to blur together after a while. "This is how the game is played." They took turns holding me down while the others watched, some even taking photographs with a Polaroid camera. The flash went off again and again, documenting my humiliation. They were laughing, joking with each other like it was a normal Friday night. Like I wasn't a person being destroyed, but entertainment they'd arranged. Have you ever left your body while something terrible happened to it? Dissociation, therapists call it now. Back then, I just knew that I floated up to the ceiling and watched a girl who looked like me being systematically broken. I counted the tiles on the ceiling, 43, in a pattern of alternating beige and white. I memorized the pattern in the wallpaper. Tiny blue boats sailing nowhere on an endless cream sea. I studied a water stain in the corner that looked like a bird in flight. I disappeared into my mind while they took everything else. Hours. It went on for hours. They had to take breaks, get more drinks, and argue about who went next. Some went more than once. Through it all, I was somewhere else. Building entire worlds in my mind where this wasn't happening, where I was safe, where I was still the ambitious young reporter who was going to change the world. When they were done, when I was bleeding and broken on that oriental rug I'd admired when I walked in, Mr. Daniels knelt beside me. His breath smelled like whiskey and cigars and cruelty. He was sweating, drops falling from his face onto mine, and I couldn't even turn away. "If you tell anyone," he said, calm as if discussing the weather, "we'll destroy you. We have the pictures. We have 10 witnesses who'll swear you begged for it. Who would believe you anyway? 10 respected men against one ambitious girl who probably seduced us for career advancement. You'll never work in journalism again. We'll make sure of that. Every paper in the country will know your trouble." The others nodded, adjusting their clothes, already rewriting history. I heard them constructing the lie. How I'd thrown myself at them, how they'd had to ask me to leave, how embarrassing it all was. Poor girl, Robertson said, shaking his head. Thought she could sleep her way to the top. We had to set her straight. By the time they let me go, they'd convinced themselves it was true. That's the thing about predators. They're excellent at revision. They can rewrite reality in real time, turn rape into a lesson, and violence into virtue. They unlocked the door and stood back, watching me struggle to stand, to find my shoes, to hold my torn dress together. "See you Monday," Mr. Daniels called as I stumbled out. "Don't be late." "And Elizabeth, wear something more professional. That dress sends the wrong message." I drove home in a haze, my body screaming while my mind floated somewhere above the car. I don't remember the drive, just suddenly being in my apartment, standing in my bathroom under fluorescent lights that made everything look worse. My face in the mirror was unrecognizable, swollen lips, bruising already showing on my neck, eyes that looked dead. I sat in my bathtub until the water went cold, then drained it and filled it again, and again. 7 times I think, though I lost count. I wanted to scrub my skin off to become someone new, someone this hadn't happened to. But the bruises just got darker, and the water couldn't wash away what they'd done. Couldn't wash away the feeling of their hands, their weight, their laughter. Do you know what I did the next day? I went to work. Sat at my desk like nothing had happened, typed stories with fingers that shook, and smiled at the very men who'd violated me. Because what choice did I have? They owned the narrative. They had the power. They had the photographs. And I needed my job to survive. I had student loans, rent, and no family money to fall back on. So I became an actress in my own life, playing the role of Elizabeth, who is fine, while the real me screamed silently from somewhere deep inside. They were so casual about it. That's what broke me more than the act itself. How normal they acted afterward. Mr. Daniels edited my stories with the same red pen, never mentioning that night. Marcus Williams asked to borrow my stapler, like he hadn't held me down while others took their turns. They'd joke around the newsroom, sometimes making comments with double meanings only I understood, watching me flinch with satisfaction in their eyes. "How's our star reporter today?" Thomas Mitchell would ask, emphasis on star that made my skin crawl. "Working on anything big?" The pregnancy test 2 months later was positive. Course it was. Because trauma compounds itself, builds on itself like interest on a loan you never took out. I sat on my bathroom floor, staring at that little plus sign, laughing hysterically until the laughter turned to sobs. I couldn't have an abortion. Not in Virginia in 1973. Not without connections I didn't have. Not without money I couldn't spare. The legal clinics were in New York, and I could barely afford groceries. I tried home remedies I'd heard whispered about. Drank teas that made me violently ill, but didn't end the pregnancy. Threw myself downstairs, earning more bruises but no miscarriage. I even went to a woman in a bad part of town who said she could help, but when I saw her dirty kitchen and rustier tools, I ran. I was desperate but not ready to die. So I did what women have always done. I handled it alone. I quit my job, telling everyone I'd gotten a better offer in another state. "Ohio," I said when pressed for details. "Smaller paper but better pay." Mr. Daniels smiled knowingly when I gave notice. "Probably for the best," he said. "This business isn't for everyone." I packed my yellow apartment, sold my typewriter with a sticky cue, and drove home to Ohio with everything I owned in my rusty Honda Civic. My parents were confused but supportive, their ambitious daughter coming home with her tail between her legs, another young woman who couldn't make it in the big city. I told them the job had been too stressful, the city too expensive. They believed me because what else could they believe? I miscarried at 4 months, alone in a hospital bathroom during what I told my parents was about a food poisoning. The pain was excruciating, worse than that night, but there was relief mixed with the agony. I flushed away the evidence of what they'd done, watched it disappear, and felt something like freedom. The nurse who found me hemorrhaging on the floor saved my life, pumped me full of blood and antibiotics, and never asked the questions I saw in her eyes. Have you ever reinvented yourself out of necessity? I buried Elizabeth the journalist and became Beth the librarian. Cut my hair short, dyed it mousy brown, traded my dresses for shapeless cardigans. Got a job at the local library where it was quiet and safe, and no one expected me to be ambitious. The head librarian, Mrs. Foster, was a widow in her 60s who never asked why someone with a journalism degree wanted to shelve books. "We all have our reasons for choosing quiet lives," she said once, watching me flinch when a male patron got too close at the reference desk. She started scheduling me for shifts with fewer men, protecting me in small ways without making a fuss about it. I lived in a small apartment above the hardware store, with 3 locks on the door and a baseball bat under my bed. I installed a chain lock, a deadbolt, and a bar that wedged under the doorknob. The windows had locks and dowels in the tracks. I was creating a fortress, trying to keep out men who'd already destroyed me from the inside. My routine was rigid, safe. Work, home, repeat. I went to the grocery store at 6 a.m. on Sundays when it was mostly elderly women shopping. I avoided bars, parties, and anywhere men gathered in groups. I ate lunch alone in the library break room, reading books about trauma, and I hid inside other dust jackets, learning words for what had happened to me. Rape, PTSD, dissociation, but never saying them aloud. Years passed. 5, then 10, then 15. The acute trauma faded into chronic pain, like a broken bone that healed wrong. I learned to smile again, though it never quite reached my eyes. I dated a few times, gentlemen who couldn't understand why I flinched at certain touches, why I needed the lights on, why I sometimes disappeared into myself during intimate moments. There was Paul, the sweet accountant who brought me flowers every Friday until I told him I couldn't do this anymore. James, the divorce teacher, held my hand so gently, but couldn't understand why I cried during our first kiss. Ben, who waited 6 months for me to be ready for more than coffee dates, then waited another 6 months before giving up. Those relationships died quiet deaths, and I let them go without mourning. How could I explain that 10 men had stolen my ability to trust, to feel safe in my skin? How could I tell them that certain cologne scents made me vomit, that surprise touches sent me into panic attacks, that I saw my attackers' faces in every man who looked at me too long? But I wasn't idle during those years. See, trauma does funny things to your brain. While part of me was playing Beth the quiet librarian, another part was planning, researching. I kept tabs on all 10 of them. Where they worked, where they lived, who they married, and how many children they had. I told myself it was just curiosity, just keeping myself safe by knowing where the dangers were. But deep down I was building files, waiting for what I didn't know. Until Marcus Williams walked into my library 20 years after that night. I was working the reference desk, helping a teenager find sources for a paper on The Great Gatsby. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, rain pattering against the windows, the library nearly empty. I heard him before I saw him, that laugh that had haunted my nightmares for 2 decades. My body reacted before my mind caught up, everything tensing, preparing to run. He didn't recognize me at first. Why would he? I was 42, graying at the temples, wearing sensible shoes and a cardigan that added 20 pounds to my frame. Glasses I didn't need but wore as another layer of disguise. Not the ambitious young journalist with fire in her eyes and daisies on her dress. He was there with his daughter, helping her with a school project. Successful businessman now. Leather shoes that cost more than my monthly rent, a wedding ring glinting under the fluorescent lights, gray at his temples that made him look distinguished instead of old. "Excuse me," he said, and my body knew his voice before my mind did. Every muscle tensed, ready to run. My hands gripped the desk edge so hard my knuckles went white. "Could you help us find books on the Civil War?" I turned slowly, my librarian smile automatic even as my heart tried to escape through my ribs. His eyes passed over me dismissively, then came back, narrowing. Recognition dawned like a horrible sunrise. I watched it happen, the casual glance becoming focused attention, the mental math as he subtracted 20 years and added trauma. Elizabeth. Elizabeth from Richmond. Beth, I corrected, my voice steadier than I felt. Just Beth now. He smiled, and it was the same smile from that night. Confident, predatory, knowing. The smile of a man who'd never faced consequences for anything. Wow, what are the odds? Hey, sweetie, he said to his daughter, maybe 12 years old with his eyes and what looked like her mother's nose. Why don't you go look at those books over there? Daddy needs to catch up with an old friend. The girl wandered off toward the history section, and I wanted to scream at her to run. Wanted to tell her what her daddy was capable of. But I just stood there, trapped behind the reference desk like I'd been trapped in that room. Marcus stepped closer and I smelled his cologne. Different brand, same effect. My skin tried to crawl off my bones. Every cell in my body screamed danger, but I couldn't move. I was 22 again, frozen while predators circled. You look good, he said, like we were old friends, like he hadn't been one of 10 men who'd destroyed me. Different but good. Librarian, huh? That's different from journalism. Yes, I said simply, scanning the book in my hands 3 times because my fingers wouldn't work properly. Different. I think about that night sometimes, he said quietly, leaning on the desk, and I nearly vomited on his expensive shoes. The casual way he said it, like he was reminiscing about a college party. Things got out of hand, but you never said anything, so I figured, no harm, no foul. Do you understand the rage that comes from someone rewriting your trauma as a minor inconvenience? No harm, no foul. Like I was in a basketball game that got too rough, like 20 years of nightmares and failed relationships, and a body that flinched at unexpected touch was no harm. I looked at this man who'd helped steal my life and saw he genuinely believed his revision. In his mind, it had been a misunderstanding, maybe a bit aggressive, but ultimately consensual since I'd stayed quiet. I need to get back to work, I said, but he caught my arm. I jerked away so violently that books scattered across the floor, the crash echoing in the quiet library. Mrs. Foster looked over from her desk, concern in her eyes. Hey, I'm sorry, he said, hands up in mock surrender. Look, I feel bad about everything. Let me make it up to you. Dinner. My treat. We can talk about old times, catch up properly. I stared at him. This man who'd violated me wanted to take me to dinner. To make it up to me with a meal like I was a waitress he'd undertipped. Like breadsticks and small talk could undo what he'd done. My mind raced through 20 years of fantasies where I hurt him like he'd hurt me, where I got justice, where I got revenge. But something in my brain clicked into place. All those years of watching, waiting, planning, suddenly I knew what for. This was it. This was my chance. Not for the revenge I'd dreamed of, but for something better. Something that would hurt him where it mattered. His reputation, his family, his carefully constructed life. Dinner sounds nice, I heard myself say. When? His face lit up. Of course it did. In his mind, I'd just absolved him. We made plans for Friday, exchanged numbers, and he left with his daughter and her Civil War books. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up, then sat on the floor and laughed until I cried. Because Marcus Williams, rapist and successful businessman, had just handed me the keys to my revenge. He just didn't know it yet. Have you ever played a long game? I mean a long game, where every move is calculated years in advance. That dinner was the first of many. I became Elizabeth again, but a new version. Confident, forgiving, interested in his stories about his failing marriage and ungrateful wife. I wore dresses again, did my hair, and even bought new perfume. Became the woman he'd want to pursue, feeding his ego with carefully calibrated responses. You've changed, he said over our third dinner, expensive wine making him philosophical. You're more I don't know. Confident. Trauma changes people, I said lightly, watching him shift uncomfortably. But I've made peace with the past. He relaxed at that, believing what he wanted to believe. That's the thing about predators. They're so convinced of their narratives that they can't see when they're being hunted. I always had a thing for you, he confessed over wine one night at a restaurant where the cheapest entree cost $50. Expensive wine at an expensive restaurant where he was showing off his success, pointing out local politicians he knew, making sure I saw how important he'd become. Even back then. You were so untouchable, so ambitious. It was attractive. Is that why you did it? I asked, my voice light, curious rather than accusatory, like I was asking about his motivation for choosing a particular wine. Because you were attracted to me? He shifted uncomfortably. We'd been dancing around that night for weeks, never quite naming it. His eyes darted around the restaurant like someone might be listening. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, he said finally. Things just spiraled. You know how men are when they drink. Pack mentality. Nobody could stop it once it started. I do, I agreed, filing away his admission. Recording it actually with a tiny device in my purse. Legal to record in Ohio as long as one party consents. And I certainly consented to gathering evidence. I certainly do know how men are. Within 6 months, he'd divorced his wife. She got the house and half his assets, which made him bitter in ways that amused me. He'd call me after mediation sessions, ranting about how unfair it was. She's taking everything, he complained. 15 years of marriage, and she's acting like I'm the villain. Like I'm some kind of monster. How unfair, I sympathized, thinking of how I'd lost 15 years to trauma while he'd built a life on the lie that he was a good man. She doesn't know the real you. Exactly, he said, missing the irony completely. You understand me, Elizabeth. You've always understood me. He proposed on a beach at sunset because of course he did. Men like Marcus believe in grand gestures that overshadow their small souls. We'd been dating for a year of me pretending to fall for him while gathering evidence, making connections and building my case. The ring was enormous, ostentatious, a display of wealth that was supposed to make me swoon. 3 carats surrounded by smaller diamonds, in a setting that screamed money. I said yes and cried tears that he interpreted as joy. Real tears, but not for the reason he thought. I was crying for the girl in the daisy dress who'd walked into a house expecting a celebration. For the 20 years I'd lost. For the revenge that was finally within reach. I want to do this right, he said, sliding the ring onto my finger where it sat like a shackle made of lies. Big wedding, all our friends there. I want everyone to see how happy we are. How perfect we are together. Everyone. I asked innocently. Even the old Richmond crowd. His face lit up. That's a great idea. A reunion. I'm still in touch with most of them. It would be perfect, show them how well we've both done. How we've moved past everything. Perfect. Yes, it would be. Do you know how satisfying it is to plan your revenge under the guise of planning your wedding? I threw myself into it with enthusiasm that Marcus mistook for bridal joy. I hired a wedding planner, told her I wanted everything documented. I want to remember every moment, I said. Professional photographers, videographers, the works. I tracked down addresses for all 10 of them, sent beautiful invitations on expensive cardstock that Marcus paid for without question. Save the date. Marcus Williams and Elizabeth Thompson request the honor of your presence. Each invitation was like loading a bullet into a gun I'd been building for 20 years. All 10 of them RSVP'd yes. Course they did. Who could resist seeing how their victim had seemingly forgotten their crime? How she'd fallen in love with one of her rapists. It must have seemed like the ultimate vindication to them. Proof that what they'd done wasn't that bad. I chose everything carefully. The venue. A historic mansion with excellent acoustics and only one exit, which could be locked from the outside. The menu, including wine, lots of wine, though I made sure the servers knew I'd be drinking sparkling cider that looked like champagne. The security, off-duty police officers who thought they were there for crowd control, but were there to keep my rapists from running. I hired the best photographers in the state, told them I wanted every angle covered. I want to see everyone's reactions to our vows, I explained. Every face, every expression. This is going to be a wedding people remember. The hardest part was maintaining my role in the months leading up to the wedding. Letting Marcus touch me, kiss me, believe he was entitled to my body again. The first time he tried to be intimate, I had a panic attack so severe he had to call an ambulance. But I played it off as pre-wedding jitters, let him comfort me, and apologized for being silly. I want our wedding night to be special, I told him. I want to wait. He found it charming and old-fashioned. Proof that I was a good girl despite what had happened. He could wait a few months, he said, for his bride to be ready. The irony of his respecting my consent now, when it served his narrative, wasn't lost on me. My sisters thought I'd lost my mind. Sarah, 2 years older and protective since childhood, cornered me at my bridal shower. "He's not right for you," she said carefully, watching me open lingerie I'd never wear. "There's something off about him. Something predatory." "You barely know him," I replied, folding silk nightgowns I'd burn after the wedding. "He's wonderful. He makes me feel like myself again." That part wasn't a lie. Planning revenge had made me feel more like Elizabeth than I'd felt in 20 years. The fighter was back. The woman who'd wanted to change the world with her words had found a different way to tell her story. "But why him?" my younger sister Marie pressed. "You could have anyone. Why someone from that time in your life?" They didn't know about that night. I'd never told them, never told anyone except therapists bound by confidentiality. But they sensed something the way family does. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "you have to face your past to move forward." The day of the wedding dawned perfectly. Clear skies, warm breeze, the kind of June day that makes you believe in fresh starts. I did my makeup, steady hands applying lipstick the color of blood. My wedding dress was white. Pure white, virginal white, the kind of white that would make the irony delicious. Expensive silk that Marcus had paid for, with a train that would photograph beautifully. My something old was my trauma, worn like invisible armor. My something new was my plan, polished to perfection. My something borrowed was time, borrowed from the 20 years they'd stolen from me. And my something blue was the color Marcus's face would turn when he realized what was happening. Sarah helped me into the dress, her hands gentle, but her face worried. "It's not too late," she whispered, fastening the buttons up my spine. "You can still call this off. Just say the word and we'll leave, go anywhere you want." "I'm exactly where I want to be," I told her, checking that the recording device was properly secured in my bouquet. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be documented. Trust me. Have you ever walked down an aisle toward your revenge? I floated on silk and tulle, Pachelbel's canon playing as I made my way toward justice. The mansion was decorated with white roses and baby's breath, ironic considering what they'd taken from me. Hundreds of guests filled the chairs. Marcus's business associates, city officials, and most importantly, my 10 rapists and their families. They smiled at me as I passed. All 10 of them, older now, successful, comfortable in their skins and their lies. They'd brought their wives, their older children, their respectable lives. Robert Chen was there with his judge's wife, both of them beaming like this was a fairy tale. James Morrison had his campaign manager with him. He was running for state senate. David Anderson brought his entire family, 3 sons who looked just like him. They probably congratulated themselves on how well I'd recovered, how their crime had left no lasting damage. Look at her, they must have thought. Marrying one of us. We did nothing wrong. She wanted it. She's proving it now. Marcus waited at the altar, beaming with pride at his acquisition. I was his absolution in a wedding dress, proof that what happened couldn't have been that bad. Behind him stood 3 of the 10 as his groomsmen, Thomas Mitchell, Robert Chen, and James Morrison. They'd remained friends all these years, bonded by their shared secret. The minister, hired for the occasion, smiled benignly, unaware he was about to officiate something very different from a wedding. The ceremony proceeded normally at first. The minister spoke about love and commitment while I stared at Marcus, letting him see what he wanted to see, a bride in love. When it came time for the vows, I'd insisted on writing our own. Marcus went first, standard promises about loving and cherishing, words that meant nothing from a man who'd proven he saw me as an object, not a person. Then it was my turn. I took the microphone, I'd insisted on it, saying I wanted everyone to hear our beautiful vows. The videographer zoomed in as instructed, catching every nuance of expression. This was it. 20 years of planning culminated in this moment. "Marcus," I said, looking into his eyes as the room fell silent. "You changed my life 20 years ago. You and 9 other men showed me exactly what kind of man you are. You showed me what you're capable of. Today I want to return the favor. I want to show everyone here exactly who you are." His smile flickered, uncertain. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The groomsmen shifted nervously. And that's when I turned to face the guests, my voice clear and carrying through the microphone. 20 years ago, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. 10 men destroyed my life. They took turns raping me at what was supposed to be a professional celebration. A party for my first front page story. They threatened to ruin my career if I spoke up. They took photographs to ensure my silence. They counted on my shame, my fear. And for 20 years they were right. I stayed quiet. The room erupted. Gasps, chairs scraping, people trying to leave. But I'd paid the security guards well, and they'd locked the doors as instructed. "Please," I said calmly into the microphone, "stay seated. This won't take long. And you'll want to hear it all. Especially you, Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Morrison. Mrs. Anderson. You'll want to know who you married." Marcus grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" he hissed, forgetting the microphone would pick it up. "You crazy bitch, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," I replied, pulling free. "Finally, after 20 years of silence, I'm telling the truth." He named them. All 10 one by one, pointing them out in the crowd. Robert Chen is now a federal judge. The same man who held me down while others took their turns. James Morrison, a city councilman running for state senate. He took the photographs. David Anderson, chief of surgery at Richmond General. He went twice. Each name was a bomb detonating in their carefully constructed lives. Marcus Williams, I continued, turning back to my groom, who just asked me what I'm doing. Who proposed to his victim, thinking it would wash away his sins. Who thought a ring could buy my silence when threats had already done it for free. His face had gone from white to red to a purple that matched the bruises he'd left 20 years ago. "You can't do this," he sputtered. "You said you forgave me. You said you'd moved on." "I lied," I said simply. "Just like you've been lying for 20 years. The difference is my lie was strategic. Yours was just cowardice." I pulled out a folder I'd hidden in my bouquet. My something borrowed was evidence, how poetic. But I've spent 20 years preparing for this moment. 20 years collecting evidence, recording conversations, building a case. Marcus here has been particularly helpful these past months. Did you know he's been confessing to me? All recorded, of course. Legal in this state to record your conversations. I pulled out a small recorder and hit play. Marcus's voice filled the room. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Things just spiraled. You know how men are when they drink. Pack mentality." The wedding guests were in chaos now. Wives staring at their husbands in horror. Children old enough to understand are looking sick. Business associates are calculating how fast they could distance themselves. The videographer kept filming as I'd paid him to do, and the photographer kept shooting. Every moment documented, every reaction captured. "The beautiful thing about a wedding," I said, addressing the room but looking at the 10 men who destroyed me, "is that it's a legal ceremony. Everything said here is on record. Every guest is a witness. And I've made sure the press knows exactly where to find us when we're done." Thomas Mitchell tried to rush the exit, but security blocked him. "This is false imprisonment," he shouted. "No," I corrected. "This is justice. Something you've avoided for 20 years. But don't worry, the real police will be here soon. BI. Because several of you have gone on to federal positions, and I've made sure to document your crimes accordingly." "You can't prove anything," David Anderson said, standing up, his surgeon's hands shaking. "It's been 20 years. No evidence." Actually, I said, pulling out another item from my bouquet. Marcus kept souvenirs. Polaroids from that night. He showed them to me during one of our dates, thinking I'd find it exciting to see myself that way. I pretended to be aroused. Let him keep them in his apartment where the FBI executed a search warrant this morning. Marcus's face went gray. Those were private property. Were, I agreed. Now they're evidence. Evidence that proves everything I've said. Your trophy collection is going to put you all away. The FBI arrived then, right on schedule. I'd been working with them for months, ever since Marcus had shown me those photographs. The wedding became a crime scene. The reception hall became an interrogation room. And I stood in my white dress, watching 20 years of patient revenge unfold exactly as planned. Elizabeth, Marcus pleaded as they cuffed him. I loved you. I was trying to make things right. No, I said, looking him in the eye. You were trying to rewrite history. To make yourself the hero of a story where you were the villain. But I'm the author of my own story now. And in my version you don't get redemption. You get consequences. They arrested all 10 of them that day. The charges varied. Some for the original crime thanks to the photographs. Others for new crimes they'd committed while thinking they were safe. Marcus for showing me those photographs, which constituted a new sexual offense. James Morrison for bribing officials to hide complaints from other women. Robert Chen for using his position to silence victims in his courtroom. The trials took 2 years. I testified at every one, steady and clear. The woman they'd tried to silence speaking truths they'd hoped were buried. Some were convicted on all charges. Others plea bargained. Marcus got the longest sentence, 25 to life. The photographs he'd kept as trophies became the evidence that destroyed him. But the real victory wasn't just the convictions. It was the other woman who came forward. Dozens of them from different years, different cities. We'd all been isolated by the same threats, the same shame. But together we rewrote the narrative. We became the story they'd tried to prevent us from telling. The aftermath was harder than I'd expected. After 20 years of planning, I didn't know who I was without the plan. I'd lived for revenge for so long that achieving it left me empty. Not disappointed. Seeing them in handcuffs was satisfying in ways I can't describe. But purposeless. What do you do when your life's work is complete? I went back to therapy, this time with Dr. Sarah Winters, who specialized in trauma recovery. Revenge isn't healing, she told me gently. It's justice, and you deserve justice. But now you need to figure out who Elizabeth is without the anger driving her. She was right. I'd been fueled by rage for so long I didn't know how to exist without it. But slowly, I began to discover who I could be. I went back to journalism. Not investigative reporting but feature writing about survivors. I told stories that mattered, just like I'd always planned. They just weren't the stories I'd expected to tell. I never married after my fake wedding. How could I? But I did fall in love. Slowly, carefully, with a woman named Janet who understood that some wounds never fully heal. She'd been at the wedding. A reporter who'd received my anonymous tip about something big happening at the Williams-Thompson wedding. She'd watched me destroy my rapists and thought, that's the bravest woman I've ever seen. Our first date was coffee at a small cafe where I could see all the exits. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. I don't know how to trust, how to be vulnerable, how to let someone in. We'll figure it out together, she said simply. And we did. Slowly, patiently, with lots of therapy and even more communication. She understood my triggers, my boundaries, and my need for control. She let me lead, let me set the pace, let me say no without explanation. We've been together 10 years now. She still calls me the bravest woman she knows, and I'm starting to believe her. We have a quiet life. A small house with a garden, 2 cats who think they run the place, and work we're passionate about. It's not the life I'd planned at 22, but it's good. It's peaceful. It's mine. I still have nightmares sometimes. Still flinch at certain sounds, certain smells. Trauma doesn't vanish just because you've had your revenge. But it changes. transforms from a weight that drowns you to a scar that reminds you of your strength. I survived 10 men who tried to destroy me. I waited 20 years for justice. I planned the perfect revenge. And I lived to tell the tale. Last month, I got a letter from one of their daughters. David Anderson's oldest is now in her 30s. She'd been at the wedding, had watched her father get arrested. I almost didn't open it. What could she possibly have to say? "Thank you," she'd written. "I know that sounds strange. But my father was a monster, and you permitted me to see it, to name it, to protect my daughters from him. You saved us by speaking your truth." I cried reading that letter. Good tears, healing tears. Because that's the thing about truth. It ripples outward in ways you can't predict. By destroying those men, I'd protected other women, other girls, futures they might have damaged. My name is Elizabeth Sarah Thompson. I'm 73 years old, and I'm no longer afraid. Not of the dark, not of powerful men, not of my own story. I was raped by 10 men who thought my silence was guaranteed. 20 years later, I destroyed them all with the truth they'd threatened me to hide. And I'd do it again without hesitation, without regret. Because here's what I learned. They count on our silence. They bank on our shame. They bet their futures on our fear. But when we speak, when we wait for the right moment and then speak with evidence and witnesses and the full force of our suppressed rage, they crumble like the hollow men they always were. To any woman reading this who's been told to stay quiet, who's been threatened into silence, who's carrying someone else's crime like it's your shame, your voice matters. Your story matters. And sometimes the best revenge is simply telling the truth at the perfect moment, in the perfect way, to destroy the men who thought they destroyed you. They were wrong. We survive. We remember. And sometimes if we're very patient and very careful, we get to watch them fall. It took me 20 years, but I had my wedding day. Just not the kind anyone expected. Instead of saying I do, I said you did. And that, my dear ones, was worth the wait. The 10 men who raped me thought they were stealing my story. They thought they could write my ending. Broken girl stays silent. Predators live happily ever after. But I rewrote it. I took back my narrative. I became the author of my own revenge story. And I gave it the ending it deserved. Justice. Consequences. Truth. That's the power we have, even when we feel powerless. We can wait. We can plan. We can choose our moment. And when that moment comes, we can speak with voices they thought they'd silenced forever. That's what I did in my white wedding dress, surrounded by roses and witnesses and the men who'd tried to destroy me. I spoke. I fell. The end. Except it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new story. One where I wasn't defined by what they did to me but by what I did about it. One where other survivors saw what was possible. One where silence was no longer the price of survival. My fake wedding became real news. The story went national, then international. Bride exposes rapists at own wedding, made headlines everywhere. I got letters from women around the world who'd been threatened into silence, who saw my story and found their courage. Some spoke up after decades. Some pursued justice. Some simply told their families the truth they'd been carrying. That's the thing about breaking the silence. It's contagious. One voice becomes 2, becomes hundreds, becomes thousands. The men who thought they'd buried their crimes in our silence didn't understand that secrets grow in the dark. They thought they were safe because we were scared. They were wrong. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. And drop a comment on what you have learned from this story. Other people want to hear from you. I'm 73 now, and I've spent the last decade helping other survivors find their voices, their justice, their peace. Not everyone needs the kind of dramatic revenge I took. Some find healing in forgiveness. Some forget. Some in quiet lives lived well. But for those who need to see their attackers face consequences, I tell them this. Be smart. Be patient. Be strategic. Document everything. Wait for your moment. And when it comes, speak your truth with the force of a hurricane. Because here's the final thing I learned. They're more afraid of us than we are of them. They're afraid of our voices, our truths, Our refusal to carry their shame. That's why they threaten us. That's why they try to silence us. Because they know that if we speak, they fall. So speak when you're ready. Speak however you need to. But speak. Because your silence protects them, not you. Your voice is your power and they know it. That's why I spoke at my wedding, in front of everyone they cared about. That's why I'm speaking now, to anyone who needs to hear it. That's why I'll keep speaking until my last breath. Because silence is what they want. And I'm done giving them what they want. I gave them justice instead. Served it to them in a white dress with a bouquet full of evidence, and a heart full of 20 years of rage transformed into strategic action. And it was, as they say, a beautiful ceremony. Just not the kind they expected.